Hello friends, welcome back. Continuing the journey of Domain 3, Security Architecture and Engineering. In this video, I'm going to talk about how to select controls based on system security requirement. This is a very broad question. So if you are going to do this, you have to first define what is our system. A system could be anything. A system could be a small software. A system could be hardware or hardware and software. Or a system could be a department in an organization or the organization itself, right? So this is a system. So first you define a system and then you think of defining security controls for this system by different perspective. By perspective, I mean you may be doing a selection of controls randomly, like you can just say that, okay, this is our software and how we can secure this software. You can go for a random hunt of security controls, but that's not an organization work or a special team works for a professional software. Now, how to approach that? So technically, when you want to approach to this problem of selecting controls of a specific system security requirement, or selecting controls for a specific secure system, then you may go from three different perspectives. You may think of the security controls from three different directions. Now, the first and foremost, the very important dimension of selecting security controls is giving consideration to the regulatory and compliance requirement of the system. So in any commercial work or non-commercial work, or even in government organization, when you define controls for a system, you see that how this system is governed from regulatory point of view, and what are the specific compliance checks this system has to have to stand for. So things like PCI DSS. So if you are a company, and most of the company are processing debit card and credit cards, so you have to comply with a standard which is PCI DSS standard. So this is one consideration where you define what security controls you want, right? So if you are a company who is providing electricity for a country, let's say, then there are different regulations, there are different regulatory requirements you have to be mindful of. So this is one dimension. The other dimension could be that you can think of a system in terms of what all threats are there, which can actually jeopardize the functioning of the system, or the expected CIA level which we want to achieve for this system. So the what I'm talking about is basically threat modeling. So you can select security controls based on threat by doing the threat analysis of the system, and you can go with different approaches which are available for threat analysis, which we have already covered in domain 1. Now the third dimension is doing a risk assessment. You can do the risk assessment of the system in context of the organization, right? So if you are a telecommunication company or a bank or a manufacturing company, there will be different flavors of doing risk assessment, but risk assessment will give you a specific security control points you should be mindful of, right? So we have discussed three dimensions of doing analysis in order to achieve, or in order to list the security controls required for the system. First is regulatory and compliance requirement, second is doing the threat analysis, and third is doing the risk management. So when we are trying to find controls for a specific system security requirement, where do we start? The starting point I have already explained, that you have to define a system, define the system, because the system exists, but you have to document it in a way that you can incorporate these three dimensions of regulatory compliance requirements, then threat analysis, and what all security control you can think from that perspective, and doing the risk assessment. And all these three dimensions come with a framework, right? So the starting point is to first go with a framework, right? There are two approaches. Either you can create your own framework, which is an exhaustive exercise, and it is not recommended to reinvent the wheel. So what you go for a specific framework for risk assessment, or for threat modeling, or for implementing the regulatory and compliance requirement. So when it comes to framework, there are three broad categories of framework. So this is not something which is academically scrutinized that these are the only three categories, but this is well agreed, based on the experience we know that these are the three categories which exist in industry. So first category of framework which we call is the control framework, right? So we have got certain frameworks which talk about all the security controls an organization should have. So for example, you have NIST 853 which talks about the security controls, and then you have got CIS controls. So these are control framework. Then you have got something which is called program framework. A program framework is a methodology basically to adopt to achieve your security goals, right? So for example, you have ISO program, and then you have got cyber security framework, the very famous framework which talks of how to implement a security program in an organization to achieve certain security objectives. And third framework category is the risk framework, right? Which talks about how to do the risk assessment or how to perform the risk management task of an organization. So these three categories we should know, that a framework could be a control framework, or it could be a program framework, or it could be a risk framework. So how do we go with these three categories, or more specifically the question is which framework we should choose, right? So to start finding the security controls of a specific system security requirement is first we should go with a program framework, right? So we can either adopt ISO frameworks, or we can go with cybersecurity framework, right? I will give you an analogy. So think of the security controls or the control framework like a big shopping mall. So in the shopping mall you have got different stores, right? Stores for your groceries, a store for your home renovation, or some cleaning products, and some gift and other things, right? You name, like in shopping mall you have got many things in there. So it has called everything in the shopping mall, right? So that is equivalent to what we call as the control framework or the control library, right? So NIST 853 has listed all the security controls, or CIS has got all the security controls. But for a specific organization or for a specific hardware or software, are you going to need all of those controls? The answer is most likely no. And that's practical, because any specific organization or software or hardware will have the limitation by the nature of the software or the nature of the organization, right? There you need some sort of catalog which will guide you what security controls you want, right? There comes the program framework, right? So program framework is like a cookbook, it's like a recipe which will guide you which security controls to adopt or not. And the risk framework we are all aware of, because we have done too much discussion on risk framework, is about how to do the enterprise risk management, how to manage risk in an organization. It's got different components like risk assessment, and then after the risk assessment we address the risk, right? So NIST 830, 839, in ISO you have got 31,000 series which talk of the risk framework. So some of the characteristic of these framework in general is as follows. The first point we should be aware of, that these frameworks are not mandatory. It's not like it's mandatory to have cybersecurity framework, or it's mandatory to implement all the CIS control. It depends on your organization and the way you design your system security, right? You may take help from one framework or more than one framework. It's all up to you. This is the first point, that they are not mandatory. Second point is they are not mutually exclusive, right? It's not like things which are present in cybersecurity framework is not in ISO, right? So they are having overlapping controls. So in some situations, like in cybersecurity framework, if you look into the profiles and in details, you will find that they have given mapping of which CIS control or ISO control or NIST control talks of which cybersecurity framework core or profile. So there you will see that these are not mutually exclusive. So first, they are not mandatory. Second, they are not mutually exclusive. And third is that they are not exhaustive. Like it's not like one framework is covering everything. So the point 3 and point 2 is kind of similar. Hard to find the difference, but by exhaustive means like they do not cover everything, right? And the third and last point we should be mindful of, that they are not standards or they are not control list. So let's take example of PCI DSS. So PCI DSS is a standard. It's not a framework, right? So we can incorporate PCI DSS to address some of the control points for a specific framework, right? It's not like a control list as well, because control list is just a list of all the controls, more like NIST 853. So think of a shop, like, you know, a shop is just not like only one aisle where you have got everything. So there is a structure, there is a hierarchy, and then this structure and hierarchy is thought of a framework, right? And in that framework there are specific security controls. I hope this is understood. So as I already explained, the three different type of framework, which is control framework, program framework, and risk framework, I will briefly explain you what are the different features of these type of framework. So when it talks to control framework identify baseline set of controls first, then it assesses the state of technical capabilities, prioritize implementation of controls, and develop an initial roadmap, which is control framework. For example, we can think of NIST 853 and CIS controls. Now, program frameworks, on the other hand, assess a state of overall security program, right? So in control framework, we also do assessment of the state of technical capabilities, because we are more interested in finding the exact technical controls. But in program framework, we assess a state of overall security program. We build a comprehensive security program. We measure maturity and conduct industry comparison. We simplify communication with business leader, which is the core outcome of a program framework, that it should be comprehensible to the business leader, right? Now, risk framework define key processes, steps for assessing and managing risk. It is structured risk management program. Risk framework identify, measure, and quantify risk. And risk framework prioritize security activities. For example, we have NIST 839, 837, 830, ISO 27005, and FAIR. There is one video where I have explained in detail the difference between NIST 839, 830, and 837. I will highly recommend to go and watch that video if you want to get an idea of that, how these different risk framework are related with each other, right? So that's all. This is all about how we select control for a specific system security requirement. I hope you enjoyed this video, and in next upcoming next videos we will be discussing more technical terms like cryptography, symmetric asymmetric encryption, digital signature, digital envelope, different encryption algorithms, public key infrastructure. So that will be more exciting. I hope to see you again in my next video, and best of luck for CISSP exams.